Italy has more than 2.5 million Muslims. It is the second largest religion in the country, and by the standards of Italian law, it does not exist. Not banned, not restricted, not monitored. Simply absent from the legal register of religions the Italian state recognizes. There are around 8 purpose-built mosques in the whole of Italy, buildings with a dome and a minaret that a person would identify as a mosque from the street. 8. France has roughly 2,500. Britain has around 1,500. Germany has around 900 run by one Turkish organization alone. Italy has 8. Everyone else prays in something else: a garage, a warehouse, a basement, a converted flat, a unit on an industrial estate. Somewhere between 800 and 1,200 of them, registered with the state as cultural associations because that is the only category available. Meanwhile, the Waldensians, a Protestant community of a few tens of thousands, have a formal agreement with the Italian Republic. So do the Seventh-day Adventists. So do the Mormons. So do Italy's Buddhists and Hindus. 13 agreements in total. Islam has none and has never had one, and this is the country that hosts the Vatican. To understand how the second religion of a European democracy became legally invisible, you have to understand a system built in 1929 by a fascist government trying to make peace with the Pope. Italy's relationship with religion is not secular in the French sense, and it is not established in the British sense. It is contractual. In 1929, Mussolini's government signed the Lateran Pacts with the Holy See, settling a dispute that had run since Italian unification stripped the Pope of his temporal territory. When Italy wrote its Republican Constitution in 1948, it did not discard that arrangement, it embedded it. Article 7 constitutionalized the pacts with the Vatican, and Article 8 said something that sounds egalitarian and functions in a completely different way. All religious denominations are equally free before the law, but their relations with the state are regulated by law, on the basis of an agreement, an intesa, negotiated between the government and the representatives of that denomination. Read that again, because the whole story sits inside it. The Italian state does not recognize religions in the abstract. It signs contracts with them, and a contract requires 2 parties. The Catholic Church has one, in the form of the Concordat revised in 1984. 13 other denominations have signed intesa since 1985, starting with the Waldensian Church. What an intesa buys is not symbolic. It is the right to have religious marriages recognized in civil law, the right to appoint chaplains in hospitals, prisons, and the army, the right to religious education in state schools, favorable tax treatment, protected time off for religious holidays, and, critically, standing in planning law as a religious body rather than a hobby club. It also grants access to a system called the 8 per thousand, under which Italian taxpayers assign a fraction of their income tax to a religious body of their choosing, distributing hundreds of millions of euros a year. And it is worth understanding who is on the outside of that arrangement, because the composition explains a great deal. Islam arrived in modern Italy late. Through the 1980s, the Muslim population was negligible. It grew roughly tenfold in 2 decades and now stands somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million, depending on which count you accept, which makes it comfortably the second religion of the country. But it arrived from everywhere at once: Moroccans, Albanians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Egyptians, Tunisians, Senegalese, Kosovars. No single national group dominates the way Turks dominate German Islam or Algerians and Moroccans dominate French Islam. They arrived speaking different languages, following different legal schools, organizing through different associations, and in many cases with no interest whatsoever in the others. That matters because of what happened in the same period elsewhere. When France and Germany decided to build a relationship with their Muslim populations, each had a dominant partner to build it with, however imperfect. Italy had a mosaic, and Italian law, uniquely in Europe, requires a single signature on a contract. Now the mechanism, and this is the part almost nobody outside Italy understands. Without an intesa, a religious community falls back on a law from 1929, the Law on Admitted Cults, which gives a thin legal status under closer government supervision and without any of those benefits. Or it falls back on nothing at all, and registers as an ordinary association under the Civil Code, which is what almost every Muslim organization in Italy has done. That is why the garage mosques exist. They are not underground in any conspiratorial sense. They are perfectly legal cultural associations, known to the authorities, often paying rent on industrial units, frequently with the local council fully aware of what happens inside on a Friday. They are simply not, in Italian law, places of worship. Think about what that means on the ground. During Ramadan, in an industrial park outside Treviso, hundreds of people gather in a rented warehouse for prayers. The building has the fire regulations of a warehouse, the parking provision of a warehouse, and the planning permission of a warehouse, because it is one. If a local official decides the capacity is exceeded, or the emergency exits are inadequate, or the use does not match the zoning, the space can be closed. Not for anything anyone said, not for extremism, for the building code. Rome closed 5 Bangladeshi garage mosques over 3 months in 2016 for lacking authorizations. Nobody had to invoke terrorism or security. They just had to read the regulations, which is the whole point. When a community's places of worship are legally warehouses, the state never needs a special power to close them. It already has an ordinary one, and the exclusion runs further than buildings. Without an intesa, there is no recognized religious marriage, so an Islamic wedding in Italy has no civil effect, and couples must hold a separate civil ceremony. There is no entitlement to Muslim chaplains in prisons or hospitals, which in a prison system with a significant Muslim population is not a small thing. There is no Islamic religious education option in state schools, where Catholic instruction is offered as standard. There is no protected right to take Eid as a religious holiday. And there is no access to the 8 per thousand tax funding, which means Italian Muslims contribute to a religious funding pool they are structurally barred from receiving anything from. So why has Islam never signed one? And here the honest answer is genuinely contested, and both explanations are partly true. The official Italian position is that there is nobody to sign with. An intesa requires a representative counterpart, an organization the state can plausibly say speaks for the community. Italian Islam does not have one. It has many. Muslims in Italy come overwhelmingly from Morocco, Albania, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Egypt, Tunisia, and Senegal, which is a far more fragmented origin mix than the Turkish-dominated German case or the Maghrebi-dominated French one. Successive applications went in and were turned down as insufficiently representative. Rome's Islamic Cultural Center applied in 1993. Another body applied in 1994. Another in 1996. All rejected on the same ground. And it is worth noting that Islam has no clerical hierarchy, no synod, no ordained priesthood, no institution that can speak for all believers, which makes the demand for a single counterpart genuinely difficult in a way it is not for, say, the Lutherans. The counter-argument, made by Italian Muslim lawyers for 30 years, is that this standard is applied to nobody else. The Assemblies of God got an intesa. The Adventists got one. Those are small denominations with their own internal disputes, and nobody asked whether every member endorsed the signatory. As one lawyer working on these cases put it, does anyone seriously think an intesa requires the agreement of every member of a community? Even logically, what would that mean? And there is the timing. Applications have been pending since the early 90s and continuously since 2000. Governments of the left, the right, and the technocratic center have all held office in that period. None has concluded one. At some point, a 30-year absence of political will stops being a coincidence about representation and starts being a policy that nobody has to defend because nobody has to announce it. Because that is the elegance of the Italian arrangement and why it belongs in this series. France passed a law and had to argue about it in Parliament. Austria launched raids and lost in court. Switzerland held a referendum and put the result in its constitution. Italy did none of those things. Italy simply never got round to it. There is no anti-Islam statute in Italian law, no minaret ban, no headscarf ban, no dissolution power aimed at Muslim organizations. Nothing to challenge in Strasbourg, because inaction is not an act. And the effect is more comprehensive than anything France achieved with its separatism law, because a French mosque at least legally exists. If you want more of the stories where the most consequential government decision is the one that was never taken, subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because Italy did eventually try to fix this, and what the state asked for in return tells you exactly what the intesa was ever really about. On February 1, 2017, at the Interior Ministry in Rome, Minister Marco Minniti signed a document with the leaders of 9 of Italy's largest Muslim organizations, bodies the government said represented over 70% of Muslims in the country. It was called the National Pact for an Italian Islam, the expression of an open and integrated community adhering to the values and principles of the Italian legal system. It ran to 10 points. Here is what the Muslim organizations committed to. Imams would be trained through a process the Interior Ministry would accompany to end what the Italian discussion called do-it-yourself imams. The names and contact details of imams and religious guides would be made public. Friday sermons would be delivered or translated into Italian. Prayer spaces would be open to non-Muslims. Financial management would be transparent, including the funding of mosque construction. The prerequisite for signing it all was repudiating every form of violence and terrorism. And here is what the Italian state committed to in return. To facilitate the path toward recognition. To organize interfaith roundtables. To hold a meeting with second-generation young Muslims to discuss rights and duties. Look at the asymmetry. One side accepted a registry of its clergy, state involvement in their training, a language requirement for worship, financial disclosure, and an open-door policy. The other side promised to help eventually and to convene some meetings. Minniti called it 3 extraordinary pillars of transformation. A coordinator involved described it as the first official bilateral document between the Italian state and its Islamic communities, which was true and also revealing, given that it arrived in 2017. Critics inside the Muslim community pointed out something sharper, that being asked to sign a preliminary pact in order to begin negotiating for recognition was a demand made of no other faith. Nobody asked the Buddhists to sign a loyalty document before starting talks. And the head of Italy's largest Muslim association, an imam in Florence, gave the pragmatic answer that tells you how little leverage the community had. Most of the things we promised, he said, we are already doing. We already encourage imams to preach in Italian. That sentence is the whole negotiation in miniature. A community with no legal standing agrees to formalize things it was already doing voluntarily, in exchange for a promise to be helped toward a status it has been requesting since 1993, and calls this progress, because the alternative is nothing. 9 years later, there is still no intesa. Then, in 2023, the direction reversed. Politicians in the governing coalition drafted a bill targeting the prayer spaces themselves. Its provision was simple and precisely aimed. Religious activity in such premises would be permitted only where the religion in question was regulated by an agreement with the Italian state. Read that mechanism carefully. The bill would not mention Islam. It would not need to. It would restrict worship to religions holding an intesa, and the only large religious community in Italy without an intesa is Islam, a rule that is neutral on its face, aimed at a group defined entirely by its absence from a list. Politicians promoting it made no secret of what it was for. Italy's Muslim community, by then around 2.5 million people, recognized immediately that the 30-year failure to sign an agreement had just been converted from an inconvenience into a legal weapon. Regional governments had already been experimenting with the same logic, and this is where the Italian pattern becomes visible. Lombardy, the wealthiest and most populous region and home to nearly 400,000 Muslims, passed a law in 2015 imposing conditions on new places of worship that made building anything non-Catholic considerably harder. Italians nicknamed it the anti-mosque law. It required regional planning approval, mandatory parking provision, surveillance camera installation, and, in some versions, a local referendum. The Constitutional Court struck parts of it down as unconstitutional precisely because of the discriminatory effect. Veneto and Liguria enacted their own restrictions. Milan suspended designated mosque sites in 2016 after a change of administration, then announced a project for the city's first official mosque in 2022, which remained under municipal review at the end of that year. This is the pattern, and it is worth naming precisely. No national ban. Instead, a patchwork of planning rules, regional laws, parking requirements, and municipal decisions, each individually defensible as neutral administration, cumulatively producing a country of 2.5 million Muslims with 8 mosques. Every single one of those decisions was taken by someone who could say, accurately, that they were not acting against a religion. They were applying zoning law. There is a name for this in the French section of this series. Critics there called it administrative obstruction. If you cannot prove a crime, you inspect until you find a violation. Italy arrived at the same destination without ever needing the inspections, because the buildings were already non-compliant by definition. Now hold the other side, because Italy's position is not simply bad faith and the security dimension is real. Italy sits on the central Mediterranean route and has managed migration pressure that no northern European country has faced directly. Between August 2021 and July 2022 alone, the Interior Ministry expelled 61 people, mostly over links it described as violent Islamist extremism. And here is the striking fact that Italian officials cite and that critics rarely engage with. Italy has suffered no successful jihadist attack on its soil of the kind that hit Paris, Nice, Brussels, Berlin, Manchester, Barcelona, Vienna, and Solingen. Not one. In a country that contains the Vatican, that hosts the Pope, that is home to some of the most symbolically valuable targets in Christendom, and that sits closer to North Africa than any other large European state. Italian security services attribute this to several things. Expulsion powers used aggressively and early, deporting people on administrative grounds long before a prosecutable offense exists, with none of the judicial process a criminal charge would require. A counter-terrorism apparatus shaped by decades of experience with domestic terrorism during the years of lead and with organized crime, which produced an institutional culture comfortable with intelligence-led disruption. And the demographic fact that Italy's Muslim population is recent and overwhelmingly first generation, so it has not yet reached the stage that produced the Bataclan attackers or the 7/7 bombers, all of whom were born in the countries they attacked. Some Italian analysts add a fourth explanation, and it is the uncomfortable one. The absence of large formal Islamic institutions has meant there is no Italian equivalent of the Hamburg Center, no national umbrella body of the kind France mapped in its Brotherhood report, no structure organized enough to be worth infiltrating or capturing. Fragmentation, on this reading, has been a security asset, which is an argument for keeping Italian Islam disorganized, and if that is genuinely part of the calculation, it has never been stated by anyone in a position to be held responsible for it. That is a serious argument, and it deserves to be stated at full strength. It is also an argument that proves less than it appears to. Italy's Muslim population is roughly a generation behind France's and Britain's. The second generation is arriving now, and it is arriving into a country where its faith has no legal existence, where the building it prays in is legally a warehouse, where its marriages are not recognized, and where a bill was drafted to close its prayer rooms on the grounds of a bureaucratic gap the state itself created and then declined to close for 30 years. If the goal was to avoid producing alienated European-born Muslims, that is not an obvious way to go about it. And the historical irony sits underneath all of it. Sicily was under Muslim rule from 827 for roughly 2.5 centuries, and Palermo under the emirs was one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the Mediterranean world. The Arab-Norman monuments that followed are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Italian surnames still carry Arabic roots, and so do words in the Sicilian dialect. The Imam of Palermo's mosque, which opened in 1989 and is the country's oldest, has described Islam as profoundly linked to Italian heritage, and says he increasingly meets Italians who are proud and happy to have such roots. A country whose second city was an Islamic capital before it was a Norman one now cannot find a legal category for the faith. So set Italy against the rest of the series, and the comparison is uncomfortable in a specific way. Every other country in this series did something. France legislated, Germany banned organizations, Austria raided, Switzerland amended its constitution. The Netherlands ran covert surveillance. Greece abolished a legal regime. Every one of those actions produced a counter-reaction. Courts, regulators, European judgments, fines, political backlash. Accountability was possible because there was an act to point at. Italy produced no act, and so there is nothing to overturn, nobody to hold responsible, and no moment at which anyone decided anything. The outcome was not chosen. It accumulated through 30 years of applications that went nowhere, planning committees that said no, regional laws that raised the bar, and governments of every political color that found the question easier to leave open. That is what makes it the quietest case in Europe, and possibly the most durable. You cannot repeal a decision that was never made. So we want to hear from you. Is Italy simply being honest about a real problem, that Islam has no single representative body to sign an agreement with? And would the state be inventing a fictional counterpart if it forced one into existence? Or is 30 years of unresolved applications from governments of the left and the right, with 13 intes signed for everyone else, including communities of a few thousand people, just a refusal that nobody has ever had to put their name to? Tell us in the comments, we read them, and if you want the stories underneath the headlines, subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because the second generation is growing up now, in a country where the room they pray in is legally a garage,